They believed they could unlock the mysteries of your fate for a few bucks, seeing the holy veil of your existence as a cheap commodity to be purchased and sold. They hired a so-called psychic or spiritual mercenary to look into the heavenly blueprint God has authored just for you. But they made one deadly mistake. They never imagined, in their wildest, most arrogant imaginations, that you would appear in your full, gorgeous, aware presence. Right there, in that dimly lighted room, your precious future was being auctioned off. In that one stunning moment, you not only crossed a spiritual realm, but you broke it. You demonstrated your God-given authority, and the spiritual world will never forget it. The psychic's hands, which had been steady tools of her alleged art, began to quiver uncontrollably. She let out a cry, her breath stopping in a knot of utter horror. This was not a little spiritual disturbance or a cross-communication from the other side. This was an assertion of divine supremacy. This was you, a child of God, clad in impenetrable heavenly armor, asserting your spiritual power and putting everyone involved, the client, the reader, and whatever evil creature they had invited, on instant and permanent notice. The word was given with the power of a thunderclap, ringing across the realms. No one may interfere with the destiny of God's chosen without his explicit permission. And after tonight, they'd be idiots to attempt. The stifling, incense-filled apartment exuded tangible fear. The tarot cards, laid on a faded velvet cover, seemed to mock the low, flickering lamplight. This psychic, a lady who had based her whole career on the perilous skill of looking into the lives of others, was about to receive a lesson that would shatter her world. The remuneration for tonight's reading was 3 times her customary amount, which should have given her a feeling of accomplishment. Instead, from the start, she felt a chilly, foreign hesitation in her heart. She had done hundreds, maybe thousands, of readings. Most were routine, predictable relationships involving unfaithful spouses or professional worries. But when her new client came, a dark person carrying a photograph, your photograph, she felt a deep, primordial alarm ring through her soul. "I need to know everything," the client urged, their voice an angry whisper as they pushed your photograph across the table. Their future, their weaknesses, their next move. Everything. The psychic paused, her fingertips lingering over your face as if it were a burning coal. A quiet voice at the fringe of her awareness cried, "Don't do it. This one is distinct. This one is safe." However, the attraction of the treble charge, a payment that might cure so many of her worldly worries, was too strong to refuse. She argued that a triple payment necessitated a triple effort, a greater dive into the spiritual unknown. She started shuffling the card with practiced, even arrogant certainty. The moment the first card, a foreshadowing of what was to come, struck the velvet fabric, time seemed to twist and then shatter. The reader's breath caught in her throat as a preternatural cold settled on the room, a shiver so strong it seemed as if the grave had opened. Every hair on her arms and back of her neck stood up. The incense smoke, which had been floating lazily upwards, froze in midair, becoming a frozen gray snake. Then, in a furious defiance of all natural law, it started to twist and writhe, spiraling downwards like a terrible vortex, coiling around the table and your portrait. "He is here," the reader murmured, each syllable passing her lips unintentionally, like a puff of frozen air. The client's eyes widened with panic and uncertainty as they raced around the room. "Who's here? What are you talking about?" the customer questioned, her voice quivering. However, the psychic was lost to them, her awareness already submerged in the tidal wave of your presence. The curtain between the physical and spiritual worlds, which she had so carelessly flirted with, had been ripped apart. The candles on her altar flashed violently, their flames dancing like tortured souls, producing large, monstrous shadows that seemed to move on their own. The stones on her shelves, which had previously provided comfort and security, started to vibrate with an audible hum. Her so-called protection stones, the amulets and talismans she relied on, were inactive, their power erased as if a heavenly switch had been switched. And her spirit guides, whom she had depended on for years, disappeared. They ran, fleeing like scared birds before a cosmic lion, fearful of a force they couldn't understand, much alone confront. You'd arrived, not as a passive subject to be examined and dissected, not as a kind, airy spirit guide who imparts enigmatic advice, and definitely not as a kindly ancestor sending consolation from beyond. You appeared as God's own ambassador, fully cognizant and present, a quiet witness whose very existence was a judgment. You were watching, listening. The verdict was already being rendered. The reader's hands, sticky with cold perspiration, trembled fiercely, forcing her to push them flat against the table to keep them stable. Her 2 decades of spiritual experience, as well as her full armory of rituals and incantations, were completely ineffective, much like attempting to halt a tsunami with a paper fan. This was not a typical spiritual experience. This wasn't some forlorn spirit passing by. This was a presence unlike any she had ever seen, an energy that defied confinement, a force that emanated from God's own throne. This was you in all your spiritual sovereignty and God-given power. It was a phenomena the reader had never seen before, a power that could not be explained, controlled, or even comprehended within her narrow mortal framework. Meanwhile, the customer, blissfully unaware of the actual nature of their disastrous blunder, squirmed uneasily in their seat. They were aware, on some level, that getting to this point had been particularly challenging. They had devoted tremendous financial and emotional resources to organizing this spiritual trespass. 5 separate psychics had flatly denied them the minute your name was mentioned, their expressions paling with hidden horror. 2 more had originally accepted, only to phone back hours later with bogus, panicky justifications about sudden scheduling conflicts. This reader was their 9th attempt, the most costly, the most desperate, and the last resort. The customer had spent weeks on this obsessive pursuit, making innumerable calls and pursuing whispered advice, their every waking minute absorbed by the need to know your secrets. Each refusal has simply fed their dark fascination, making you seem even more mysterious, powerful, and hence a more appealing prey. They were motivated by a poisonous combination of unfinished business and unresolved emotions. Perhaps it was a jealous ex-lover who couldn't understand that you had moved on to a better future. Perhaps it was a nasty business rival, consumed by jealousy that had poisoned their own soul. Or it may have been someone who smiled at you, a wolf in sheep's clothing, while covertly planning your demise. It may even have been a bitter family member who was upset about the limits you had established, or a previous boss who was enraged by your success. Their individual motivations were inconsequential in the big scheme of things. What mattered was the extent of their despair, the darkness that drove them, the remarkable lengths they went to, the moral and spiritual boundaries they were prepared to break in order to acquire a look into your future, your vulnerabilities, and your purported weaknesses. All spoke volumes about their character, or lack thereof. They want control over a future that was never, and would never be, theirs to shape. They sought control over a force, a child of God, that refused to be subdued. To them, knowledge was power, but the information they wanted was prohibited, like a key to a door they were never supposed to unlock. Paying 3 months' wages for this one reading seemed like a little price to pay for the benefit they expected it to provide. They were ready to put their financial security at risk for the brief promise of an advantage, surrendering stability for an illusory feeling of control. They thought they were being smart by tugging threads from what they saw as a secure, spiritual distance. They saw this as the spiritual equal of breaking into someone's personal computer files, a rapid, detached, and anonymous transaction. A simple commercial transaction with a spiritual mercenary, with no regard for the repercussions, and no feeling of responsibility for the grave transgression they were doing. What they failed to see in their arrogance and ignorance was that they hadn't just hired a psychic to commit a spiritual data breach. They had not commissioned a basic magical surveillance operation. In their desperation, they unknowingly established a direct, unbreakable link with you. They had bridged the gap between their evil goals and your heavenly light, extending a formal invitation across the spiritual worlds. You had just accepted an invitation with perfect authority. The customer leaned forward, their voice filled with impatient displeasure, utterly unaware of the gravity of their error. "Why did it get so cold in here? Is something wrong with the heat?" they inquired, their trivial worries in stark contrast to the cosmic drama happening around them. But the reader's gaze never left the vortex of smoke swirling over your shot. Her last words were a strangled, scared murmur. "You didn't tell me who this person really is. You should have told me." Professional readers, including charlatans, acquire intuition or a sixth sense when they are treading into perilous waters. The caution signals had been blasting since the customer came in. The tarot cards seemed strangely thick and resistive to her touch. A pendulum that had been absolutely steady on her wall all evening started swinging wildly the minute your image was put on the table. Her spirit guides, who were typically a continual source of advice and insight in her thinking, had gone completely silent, the most terrible warning of all. Before she had even touched a single card, a crushing weight had gathered in her chest, a tangible embodiment of a spiritual force pushing back, urging her, "Do not proceed." The message was obvious, though unspoken. Do not read this person without permission. This is not a soul you should tamper with. This is not a destiny that you should interfere with. Still, the seductive call of the treble payment, the opportunity to impress a rich and desperate new customer, and her own professional pride had made the danger seem acceptable, even reasonable. But the moment her fingers touched the first card and laid it on the table, the illusion of control vanished. The Tower. The card represents abrupt, cataclysmic devastation, foundations broken apart, and full and utter upheaval. The instant the card struck the velvet, reality shifted. The borders between worlds dissolved into nothingness, and the flat that had previously been her shelter, her holy zone, was immediately defiled. Her own selfishness and hubris had opened a door, and she had no clue what lay beyond it. Most spiritual presences appear quietly. They manifest as delicate perceptions, such as a little change in temperature, a faint, familiar aroma, or a whispered message on the verge of hearing. Spiritual visitors, especially strong ones, generally arrive with a feeling of courtesy, respecting the physical realm's limits and the practitioner's sacred place. They are waiting for recognition and permission to interact. They take care not to overload the mortal senses. They realize where they fit into the realm's vast, intricate structure. Not you. The instant your name was pronounced maliciously over your picture, you came with the total, indisputable authority of a heavenly monarch entering his palace. There was no smooth transition or gradual expression. You were not present for a brief time. The next, you were completely, powerfully present. 1 second, the room was hers. Then it was completely and utterly yours. The energy in the room did not just transfer, it was transmuted. It became electric and weighty, laden with enormous, tangible potential. The space between air particles seemed to shrink, the distance between realms shrunk, and what was once an average flat in a busy metropolis transformed into a hallowed, terrible barrier between worlds. The reader gasped for oxygen, sensing the obvious presence of another awareness pushing not only on her mind, but fully overpowering it, filling her psychic senses and shattering her mental shields like spun glass. You didn't ask for permission. You didn't wait for an invitation. You did not recognize her claimed power in her own space. You were not following the established norms of spiritual visitation. You were rewriting them. You easily seized the land, establishing divine authority without exerting any effort, changing her refuge into your kingdom with the very power of your presence. The energy grew so concentrated, focused, and intense that it seemed nearly physical. The light from the solitary bulb seemed to curve around invisible things. Shadows appeared in places where nothing should have been obstructing the light, and a quiet, forceful demand vibrated through the building's very foundations, an unspoken question: who called me? This unmistakable desire pulsated through your energies. The words went unheard, but they were heard in the bones, the blood, and the darkest depths of their souls. The plea for responsibility, for a reckoning, echoed across the room. It was not a proposal. It was not a whisper. It was a holy order that rocked the windows in their frames, a force that pushed against the walls and twisted the laws of corporeal reality to your immeasurable will. The reader's hands trembled so fiercely that she knocked the remaining cards off the table. They spread over the floor like a swarm of frightened birds. The Tower card, which had begun it all, fell face up at the client's feet, conveying a personal, foreboding warning. The Judgment card, featuring an angel blowing a trumpet for the last reckoning, landed precisely on top of your portrait, a portent of such deep importance that it could not be disregarded as a coincidence. The remainder of the deck sailed into the air, with some cards landing on their sides and remaining perfectly erect in defiance of gravity. The customer, jerked out of their haughty trance, pulled their chair back with a yell, their eyes flying frantically about the room, desperately looking for a sensible, tangible explanation for what was going on. Their horror deepened with each passing second as their reasoning intellect, their greatest source of pride, attempted to classify the inexplicable. Every word they attempted to say was tinged with growing, uncontrolled terror. All of their carefully cultivated confidence melted like sugar in water. Their illusion of control, which they had paid a high price for, had vanished. The scheme they had devised, which was full of malice and cunning, was annihilated by a force so powerful that it may have come from another universe. Arrogance collapsed into a primitive dread of the unknown. The reader found herself unable to respond to the client's anxious queries. Her throat tightened, and her breath came in thin, rapid spurts. 20 years of spiritual practice, of communication with the invisible, were made completely meaningless in a single, horrific moment. Decades of experience had offered no preparation, protection, or precedent for what was currently unfolding. Her professional serenity, her carefully created air of magical authority, had crumbled into a million pieces. She was confronted with something much beyond anything she had ever encountered or attempted to manage. A little pause, my lovely Christian family. If this message resonates deeply inside your soul, if you experience the reality of divine protection in your own life, I'd like to welcome you to join our expanding community here at God Connection. Take a minute right now to click the subscribe button. Join our family as we study God's immense power and unwavering love for His chosen people. Your membership allows us to reach more individuals who need to hear our message of hope and empowerment. And if you feel compelled to contribute to this holy work on a deeper level, please use the Super Thanks button located below this video. A $10 donation, or whatever amount you feel inspired to donate, goes directly towards keeping this channel running and helping us to continue making material that provides truth, light, and divine clarity to a world in urgent need of it. Your contribution is more than simply a gift. It is a seed planted in fertile ground, an act of faith that enables us to spread God's message. Now, let's continue the narrative. This message is dedicated to those of you who have never sought worldly fame and have never requested permission to be who God made you to be. This is for those who just exist in their God-given strength. Here's to you, the vanguard, spiritual pioneers, the first to arrive. A quiet heavenly army approached you from behind in that chamber. Generations of your dedicated forefathers, their souls strong and steadfast, walked in quiet, disciplined formation. Your spirit guardians, old and knowledgeable spirits linked with your soul's divine path, assumed their posts. And your guardians, powerful, watchful, celestial forces committed to your spiritual protection, built an unbreakable barrier. They marched in like a holy army, organized, overpowering, and completely quiet. The reader felt the pressure in the room increase with each additional heavenly presence. And even the spiritually untrained client felt the crowding of invisible forces, a sensation of being enormously outnumbered in a room that was physically empty except for the three of them. The sheer volume of the accumulating energy was beyond the little apartment's capacity. The walls themselves seemed to pulse, expanding and contracting with each fresh arrival. Pictures on the walls shifted, Books on the shelf vibrated, and a crystal hanging in the window started to spin madly, creating frenetic, dancing rainbows around the room. "There are so many," the reader said in wonder, her voice wavering. "So many of them." The client's face, which was already pale, had lost all of its color. They were scarcely able to grasp the enormity of what was unfolding, their minds on the verge of collapsing. The reader couldn't find the words to describe the holy court that had convened in your honor. Her holy sanctuary was no longer her own. The customer had lost all sense of control. Their carefully devised, spiteful scheme had entirely failed. They had come looking for your weaknesses, wanting to plan out your future, expecting to be in a position of power, asking questions, and obtaining an edge. However, the reversal was so quick, total, and complete that they scarcely had time to notice the change in authority. The cards on the floor started rearranging themselves, not for you, but for them. Your energy, your heavenly light, was now beaming like a celestial spotlight, not being inspected, but rather inspecting, not being questioned, but questioning. Suddenly, the client felt completely, terrifyingly exposed. Every hidden calculation, secret resentment, each previous act of sabotage and betrayal was exposed under your quiet, omniscient gaze. Sweat beaded on their brow, and their heart pounded against their ribcage like a caged bird. "Make it stop," they implored, their voices quivering with panic, looking to the reader as if she still had authority. "Please, make it stop." The reader could only shake her head, her eyes wide with horror that matched theirs. "I can't," she muttered. "What do you mean, you can't?" the customer said. "This is your place, your session. Do something." The reader's voice shook with a fresh, unnerving confidence. "Not anymore," she said, her eyes remote. "This isn't my reading now." The client's deepest secrets started to emerge without their will, not out loud, but projected into the room's energy field for everyone to observe. Every manipulative moment, every envious thought, and every deceitful deed they had ever perpetrated was mirrored back to them in perfect, horrific detail. Only then, at that moment of complete spiritual nakedness, did they comprehend the actual magnitude of their error. The reading ended as quickly as it started. Your energy and assembled court withdrew. You were not exiled. You just departed on your own divine decision, your point having been conveyed with stunning accuracy. The customer exited the flat in shock, not caring to pay the remaining simoing. Their only concern was to leave the location where their soul had been so completely dissected. The psychic was left alone in the rubble of her holy area, her hands still quivering hours later. Something deep inside her felt shattered. Her carefully cultivated link to her intuition, the basis of her livelihood, was shattered, maybe forever. Her faith in her own spiritual advisors, who had abandoned her in her hour of greatest need, was shattered. Her faith in her skills, her whole identity as a psychic, was destroyed. In the days and weeks that followed, her practice crumbled. When she could bring herself to touch the cards, she found nothing but gibberish and nonsense. Her projections were horribly inaccurate. Her insights, once crisp and distinct, vanished like morning mist. Her usual customers noticed the difference. Bookings have dropped. Her reputation, her most precious possession, was irreparably damaged. Her nightmares were tormented by the memories of your enormous, unequivocal, and completely scary presence. She had violated a spiritual barrier that should never have been crossed. She had sought to gaze into the shielded fate of a soul well beyond her ability to read. She was finding that the ramifications extended beyond career disappointments. Soon, her everyday existence was disrupted by a series of weird and unpleasant events. Her home's electronics started to fail for no apparent reason. Her phone would randomly turn off during essential calls. Her computer would malfunction and crash, losing hours of work. Appliances would fail at the most inopportune situations. Her apartment's pipes, which had been good for years, abruptly burst, leaving her with considerable water damage and growing repair expenditures. Everyday items, like as her vehicle keys or wallet, would disappear without a trace, only to return days later in the most unusual and implausible locations, disrupting her sense of reality and safety. None of these occurrences were terrible in isolation, but when combined, they generated a continuous and increasing sensation that her life had shifted out of balance and she was no longer in charge. It was as if a subtle, unseen force was manifesting itself in her life, a persistent, nagging reminder that certain spiritual blunders are irreversible. Certain borders, once passed, permanently and irreversibly changed the trajectory of one's journey. The weight of what she had done increased with each passing day. She started to ponder giving up her spiritual practice totally. Perhaps it was better to just walk away, to lock the door on a world where she no longer felt at ease, a world where she had come face to face with a force that had completely humbled her. Perhaps the cosmos, or God himself, was delivering her a clear and unequivocal message. Some doors are intended to stay locked. Some energies are intended to stay unaffected. And some individuals, God's chosen, are supposed to remain unread. The customer who had booked the unfortunate reading did not avoid the repercussions. They had approached the reader looking for leverage, control, an edge, or a hidden weapon to use against you. Instead, they left with something altogether different. The Tower card, which arrived so spectacularly in the reader's apartment, was not intended for you. It was intended for them. It represented devastation, turmoil, and the total breakdown of all illusory systems in their lives. Within days, their carefully built existence started to collapse with dizzying speed. The promotion at work they had been hoping for, the one they were certain was theirs, was suddenly given to someone else. A relationship they valued, a source of comfort and security, was suddenly overshadowed by suspicion and tension, collapsing in front of their eyes. Their financial stability deteriorated as a succession of unexpected and pricey costs accumulated. Appliances in their house failed one after another. Their investments had suddenly plummeted. Bills piled up, and their incomes seemed to diminish. Nothing appeared to go well. Every scheme they devised collapsed. Every stride forward they attempted was met with unseen, unyielding barrier. Despite their best efforts to dismiss these losses as a run of bad luck or a series of unfortunate coincidences, they knew the truth deep within, in the place where their soul now shook. Each difficulty and disappointment had the same chilly energy signature they had sensed that night in the reader's apartment. Each defeat seemed deliberate, definitive, targeted, and terribly personal. This wasn't petty retaliation. This represented a basic balance of the cosmic scales. A spiritual debt was being collected. They had attempted to wield the universe's energies as a weapon against one of God's own, but instead had created the instrument of their own destruction. The cosmos, created and managed by God, follows rules, divine laws, and trying to tamper with the safeguarded destiny of a chosen soul comes with a high penalty, a debt that must be paid. A loan that they were now repaying with compound interest. Each night, their nightmares were a misery of turning cards, hopelessly spiraling incense smoke, the sensation of invisible eyes watching them, and a verdict pronounced with no chance of appeal. Experienced spiritual workers, authentic ones who walk in humility and light, comprehend the heavenly order of souls. Most individuals go through life with a minimum amount of spiritual protection, a natural immune system endowed by the Creator. Others, such as empaths and people with innate psychic abilities, have greater shielding. But then there are the selected few. Souls have a special, heavenly purpose, destinies that are intricately linked to God's will and are safeguarded on levels that ordinary humans cannot comprehend. Despite her extensive knowledge, the reader should have detected the indications. She has faced your sort before, albeit possibly not one as strong, and should have known to flee. The customer, engrossed in their own spiritual ignorance and arrogance, had little possibility of comprehending. However, spiritual ignorance provides no shelter against divine rule. Attempting to read a chosen one without their agreement is equivalent to attempting to hack into heaven's mainframe or break into the heavenly kingdom's most strongly protected vault. The safeguards are intended to capture intruders in the act, rather than just keeping them out. The answer is not random nor unintentional. It is the spiritual counterpart of a supernatural immune response, precise, effective, and overpowering. The chosen ones do not even need to intentionally protect themselves. The cosmos, God's creation, accomplishes it for them automatically. The rules of spiritual sovereignty are absolute, divine, and unchangeable. The reader knew better, or she should have. The customer discovered the hard way that certain energies are never intended to be touched, some destiny are not to be disturbed, and some persons, the beloved of God, are simply, unambiguously, untouchable. Your presence in that reading room was more than simply a passing visit. You left a spiritual imprint, an unforgettable trace. The reader noticed it right away, an energy residue that no amount of sage, salt, or cleaning rituals could ever eradicate from her space or spirit. The customer also carried it with them, an invisible mark on their aura, imperceptible to the ordinary eye, but recognizable to anybody with pure spiritual sight. It wasn't a curse in the traditional sense of the word. It was a piece of proof, a heavenly fingerprint left at the site of their spiritual violation. That mark altered how the cosmos dealt with them. Energy that formerly flowed freely in their lives has now become stagnant. Luck, which had appeared to favor them, had suddenly turned against them. Their worldly shields and benefits vanished. The reader, trying to restore some kind of balance to her broken life, attempted every cleaning ritual, energy healing treatment, and spiritual bath she had ever encountered. But nothing could undo what was done. The customer, who was similarly desperate, sought assistance from other psychics in the hopes of finding a cure to erase this spiritual stigma. Every single one of them identified the same issue. They all recognized an electromagnetic signature that said, "Someone is monitoring you." Each psychic they contacted expressed it differently, but the underlying idea remained the same. "Why is everything in my life going wrong?" the client would ask, their voice filled with frantic anger. One psychic, a wise old lady who recognized the distinct mark of divine judgment, met their gaze with a look of startling, dawning comprehension. "You tried to read someone you shouldn't have," she said quietly. No more explanation was required. The mark was not a form of punishment. It was a result. It wasn't retribution. It was about equilibrium. And, although it wasn't always permanent, it would continue as long as it needed for the lessons to be learned, the debts to be paid, and the cosmos to restore the holy equilibrium they had so foolishly attempted to disturb. News of the occurrence traveled quickly across real spiritual communities, not as idle gossip, but as shared dreams, startling flashes of understanding, and tarot cards that frequently provided the same profound warning message. The reader would never use your name again, not even in her own thoughts, for fear of inviting your terrible presence once again. However, other sensitives, including real intuitives and healers, caught up on the narrative via the ether. They experienced visions, impressions, and stern warnings of a chosen one who passionately maintained their divine sovereignty, a soul who might emerge unexpectedly and turn the tables on anybody who dared to exploit them. Your reputation in these clandestine communities evolved silently, with little effort or even awareness on your part. Psychics started to deny readings that even hinted at being about you, refusing payment regardless of how generous the offer. "I don't read certain energies," they would add, their voices full of newfound respect. "It's not safe. I can't look at that person's future. I'm sorry. Some paths are protected by a higher power. I won't interfere." These statements formed a silent, unspoken refrain within the spiritual community. Increasingly, individuals who performed the mystical arts, psychics, healers, and intuitives of all kinds, found themselves hesitating whenever your name was spoken, a reverent silence falling over even the most confident and raucous groups. The rising consensus was unequivocal. Your fate was protected by a power that no one in their right mind would attempt to oppose. It was as if a giant, unseen hand had drawn a border line in the ether, designating your soul as off-limits, surrounding you in supernatural protection that needed no explanation, just to be respected. This influence spread, reaching even people who had never seen you, and had only heard whispers of your awe-inspiring presence. Your foes, who had previously been so sure in their ability to utilize spiritual methods against you, suddenly realized they were completely alone. The dark practitioners, the unholy mentors, the so-called friends they had formerly relied on for direction and assistance, started to deny their requests, becoming mute and evasive, hesitant to participate in what they now saw as a losing war against God Himself. The familiar paths of spiritual insight and dark support on which they had depended were shut down one by one, until your opponents found themselves spiritually exiled, cut off from the same wisdom and strength they had previously taken for granted. Some of them attempted to excuse the shift, claiming that it was just a series of coincidences, that they were being too suspicious, or that it was simply a lengthy run of poor luck. But the cold, bitter reality gnawed under their denial. The terror spread not via spectacular confrontations or blatant warnings, but rather through a subtle, common knowledge, a terrifying, shared understanding that your energy, your very soul, could not be crossed. Even the most hardcore doubters, those who dismissed the concept of spiritual rules or invisible limits, were hesitant when your name came up in conversation or crossed their thoughts. A peculiar, unexplainable weight would settle in, causing a subtle but persistent ache that defied sense. They felt the weight of unseen eyes on them, as well as the unmistakable and uncomfortable sensation of going over a boundary that should never, ever be crossed. And nearly often, they pulled away, not understanding why, but knowing with utter and horrifying certainty that the peril was real. Your adversaries, trapped in divine doubt, could no longer plot against you. They found themselves absolutely unable to predict your next move, foresee your goals, or prepare for your success. They were unable to acquire the spiritual or worldly knowledge they had previously depended on to keep one step ahead. They were stranded, paralyzed by the same forces they had so arrogantly attempted to influence, caught in the spiritual aftermath of their own transgression. Meanwhile, you proceeded on your journey, unaffected by their fruitless efforts to intervene. Your road was being cleared by cosmic justice, which oversees the journeys of all God's chosen. I'd want to chat with you straight now. If you've ever felt like you're being watched over, that there's a force directing your movements and protecting you from damage you can't see, it's because you are. You are a part of the God connection. Remember to subscribe to this channel to continue getting these powerful reminders of who you are in Him. And if this message has impacted you, please consider making a $10 Super Thanks gift. Your donation is a blessing, allowing us to continue this essential job. What happened during that fateful reading was more than simply a bizarre coincidence or a moment of magical mayhem. The cosmos, at God's direction, delivered its ultimate decision. That judgment was for you. It became evident, incontrovertible evidence that you are unlike the others. Your security is woven into the very fabric of your existence, as part of a broader divine plan that few can fully fathom. When your spiritual privacy was violated, you did more than merely fight the assault. You flipped the whole situation on its head. You did more than just protect your holy turf. You turned it into a proving ground, a school where your divine power was unequivocally established. The battlefield was characterized by presence and energy rather than violence or anger. You took command of the situation, turning the spiritual gaze until those who had attempted to intrude into your life became unwitting victims of their own evil intents. Their secrets, hidden agendas, and devious plots were all revealed and mirrored back to them with unfiltered, heavenly clarity. The message was clear and reverberated throughout the spiritual realms. Those who dare to violate the holy sovereignty of a protected soul become cautionary stories, living examples for anyone who may consider such a breach in the future. This strong reaction from the cosmos did not need any intentional effort on your part. It was already there, embedded in your own essence, spiritual DNA. Your soul's authority is self-acting and self-sufficient, vibrating at frequencies far beyond the scope of human language or ordinary perception. To individuals who approach you with respect and a pure heart, recognizing your energy and spiritual limits, You are a source of tremendous inspiration, strength, and unlimited giving. However, for those who disregard divine warnings and attempt to push their way into your holy zone, the repercussions are immediate, unavoidable, and profoundly humble. They realize that your limits are not ego-built barriers, but rather pillars of cosmic, divine law. Your energy does not go across the globe trying to punish. It is not a power that pursues transgressors, wrongdoers, seeks personal revenge. Instead, it waits quietly and calmly, reacting only when challenged and unleashing its full might when aroused. However, when it does rise, it restores equilibrium by establishing an unchallenged authority and power. The divine order you bear is a natural, intrinsic aspect of the universe, not something imposed on it. The protection you get is not given out of preference, but out of general need. No one, no matter how smart, wealthy, or powerful they are, can get access to what God has decided is just for you. No outside force can change the holy script that has already been written on the pages of your destiny. What the cosmos, in its almighty wisdom, has decreed as yours cannot be taken, controlled, or diverted. The night of that reading, with all of its spiritual turmoil and fear, will be eternally stamped on the memory of everyone who saw it or felt its tremendous reverberations. The psychic, once proud and confident, is now a troubled woman, permanently changed by the moment she crossed that invisible, holy boundary. Her practice is almost completely abandoned while she attempts, most likely unsuccessfully, to restore her shattered trust and damaged connection to the spiritual world. The customer, whose dark dreams vanished before their very eyes, continues to stumble through a life constantly defined by instability, tragedy, and the inevitable, terrifying sensation of being watched by invisible, disappointed eyes. In the larger spiritual community, those who are sensitive to subtle alterations in the world's energy terrain discreetly identify your existence as a new and formidable kind of force, one that is utterly beyond their influence or control. All of the characters in this heavenly drama now have a more thorough knowledge. You exist beyond illegal access. Your trip develops according to its own divine timeline, untouched by others' petty goals or wicked machinations. Your fate is not up for dispute. It is not subject to modification by anybody other than yourself and God Himself, as well as the higher forces that watch over you. The reader will never forget the tremendous, awe-inspiring sensation of presence that permeated and seized her holy sanctuary. The customer will never reclaim the false, arrogant feeling of power that they formerly enjoyed so much. And you will continue to go ahead, frequently oblivious of how many fights have been fought on your behalf in the invisible worlds. You may not witness every spiritual defense raised in your name, but your soul, the everlasting part of you, understands the truth. You live in both the physical and spiritual planes at the same time, a bridge between worlds, a force that brings divine reckoning when required. Yet you are always protected, sovereign, and untouchable. The aftermath of their unsuccessful endeavor reveals the truth. Lives were irreversibly altered, reputations transformed, and energy were permanently realigned. The spiritual world now acknowledges your authority and tells your narrative as an everlasting reminder to humanity. You cannot be touched without your clear consent. You cannot be seen without your conscious permission. You cannot be coerced, sidetracked, or overcome against your will. Your journey is yours alone. Your destiny is a unique, sacred agreement between your soul and the divine. This truth is not the result of pride, ego, or an imagined specialness. It is merely the natural functioning of a bigger, divine order designed to keep the cosmos in balance, harmony, and fairness. When they attempted to spy on your future, they were met with an impenetrable wall of cosmic law. When they tried to transgress your sacred boundaries, they were greeted with the unwavering power of your soul's God-given authority. Finally, they discovered a universal, if painful, principle. Certain souls only respond to higher, heavenly authority. Some doors stay closed for very good reasons, and certain individuals, by virtue of their holy destiny, just cannot be touched, no matter how cunning or determined their adversaries may be. As a result, your legend develops not by your own effort or desire, but through the natural, beautiful unfolding of God's divine rule. Your energy continues to flow through the globe, quietly, strongly, and unchecked, protected by energies much larger than any human force. Those who formerly attempted to use you for their own selfish objectives are now living warnings to others. And the world, both visible and invisible, remembers the day they attempted to reach the untouchable and found themselves eternally and deeply transformed. That's all for today, lovely family. Father God, I come to you in prayer, asking for the ongoing development of my faith and that of everyone watching. Help us to wholeheartedly trust you, even when the concrete evidence in our life seems to contradict your promises. Let us trust in your constant, loving presence, knowing that you will never abandon or forsake us. We believe your word in Jeremiah 29 verse 11, that your plans for us are of peace, not of evil, to offer us a future and hope. Thank you, kind and everlasting Father, for always hearing our petitions. We present our petition to you in Jesus' great and incomparable name. Amen. Thank you, Jesus, for your unconditional love and divine provision. I am forever thankful for your presence in my life and the richness you provide. If this video spoke to your spirit, please show your support by liking it, subscribing to the God Connection channel, and sharing it with people who need to hear this powerful message of hope and heavenly protection. Please leave a remark below and share your own experience. How has God taught you that you are safe? Finally, if you feel moved to support our ministry and help us continue to broadcast these messages, please consider making a donation using the Super Thanks button below. Whether it's a $10 contribution, a prayer, or just sharing this video, your generosity allows us to promote God's message and provide hope to people all around the globe. No present is too tiny when it comes from the heart. Do not stop here. Click on the next video to get more profound discoveries regarding the indications that show you are indeed one of God's chosen ones. We have been really fortunate to share this spiritual journey with you. Thank you for sticking with us to the end. Continue to shine your light brightly and face the great future God has prepared for you with bravery and trust. See you next time. God Connection sends blessings to all lovely people.